My husband became the bank manager and marked the promotion by serving me divorce papers the very same day. I signed without a tear and walked away quietly while he laughed with his coworkers about shedding dead weight. It was supposed to be our victory night. The restaurant glittered with gold lights and champagne flutes, everyone raising glasses to celebrate Frank's promotion. I stood there in my best emerald dress, the one he once said made me look like his good luck charm. I had worked 2 jobs for years, sacrificing sleep and weekends so he could finish his degree and climb that corporate ladder. That night should have felt like the reward for all those years of shared struggle. Instead, it became the moment my marriage ended. He waited until everyone was gathered around, cameras flashing, laughter bouncing off the marble walls. Then he pulled out a crisp manila envelope and slid it toward me like a business proposal. "You've been amazing, Eliza," he said, voice smooth as glass. "But I need someone who can keep pace with my new life." The laughter around us died instantly. I opened the envelope and saw the words "Petition for Divorce" printed in bold black ink. I felt the blood drain from my face, but my hands didn't shake. Across the room, Vanessa, his glamorous co-worker with her perfect smile, stood watching, her eyes filled with quiet satisfaction. Frank looked almost proud of himself, as if humiliating me in public was some kind of power move. He even joked to one of his colleagues, "Can't keep dead weight if you want to fly." I could have screamed. I could have thrown the drink in my hand across his smug face. But I didn't. Instead, I signed the papers right there in front of everyone. The pen felt heavy, but my hand was steady. I smiled faintly, slid the papers back to him, and said, "Congratulations, Frank. You finally became the man you always pretended to be." Then, before the silence could swallow the room, I reached for a plate, grabbed a handful of bacon-wrapped shrimp, those expensive ones he'd insisted on ordering, and walked right out the door. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. My heels clicked against the pavement as I walked to my car, the laughter from inside muffled behind the restaurant doors. For a moment, I let myself breathe. No tears. Just silence. I realized something then. He had freed me. The man I had once loved had turned into a stranger obsessed with appearances and titles. The woman he thought he was discarding? She was finally untethered. That night, I didn't drive home. I drove to the ocean instead. I stood by the water and let the wind whip through my hair. The waves crashed like applause, and I whispered to myself, "Dead weight doesn't fly, it floats away." The night before his big promotion, something about Leo felt off. He was restless, pacing between the living room and his home office, pretending to check emails. I sat on the couch with a half-finished glass of wine, watching the clock tick toward midnight. He had grown distant for months, smiling too wide, staying out too late, but I'd told myself it was just stress. That night, though, the silence between us felt staged, like a performance he was desperate to end. When he finally fell asleep, phone clutched to his chest, curiosity got the better of me. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was looking for reassurance. What I found instead shattered the illusion of the life I thought I had. His laptop was open on the desk. Normally, he was obsessive about locking it. But this time, maybe out of arrogance or distraction, he hadn't. I saw a browser tab still active, a Pinterest board titled Fresh Start. My breath caught. It was full of sleek bachelor apartments, luxury watches, and inspirational quotes about freedom and reinvention. None of it looked like our life. We were supposed to be buying a house together, planning for a family. This was a fantasy built for one. My stomach turned cold as I scrolled through image after image of a life that didn't include me. Then came the final confirmation. His phone buzzed softly beside him. A message preview lit up the screen. Sloan. Can't wait to celebrate properly tomorrow. Almost free. That word, free, felt like a blade. It wasn't the first time I'd seen her name. She worked at his bank, the same woman who had been lingering in every story he told about the office lately. I had brushed off my suspicions as paranoia, as the insecurity of a tired wife married to a man climbing too fast. But now the truth was sitting in front of me, glowing on a small phone screen. I stared at Leo sleeping peacefully, his face illuminated by the faint blue light from his laptop. How long had he been planning this? The new apartment, the promotion, the fresh start, all timed perfectly. The dots connected like a cruel constellation. Every late meeting, every sudden trip, every new expense he brushed off as networking. I realized then that the man beside me hadn't been building a future with me. He'd been quietly constructing an escape route. I didn't cry. I didn't wake him. I simply sat there, the weight of understanding pressing down on me until I could hardly breathe. The betrayal wasn't just in the affair, it was in the preparation. The months of pretending, of smiling at me across the table while already erasing me from his plans. He had made me a spectator in my own life. When dawn approached, I closed his laptop, slipped the phone back into his hand, and went to the kitchen. I poured the rest of the wine down the sink and watched it swirl away. That was the moment something inside me hardened. The woman who had once trusted him completely was gone. What replaced her was quiet, deliberate, and waiting. When Leo raised his glass at the promotion party, smiling like a man who had just won the world, I was already finished playing the role of the humiliated wife. He had handed me the divorce papers, announced his freedom, and turned away as if my existence had been nothing more than a stepping stone. But while he laughed with his co-workers, I was already making my own quiet exit. Not just from the room, but from his life entirely. I didn't go home to cry. I went home to prepare. The apartment was still, holding the scent of our shared life, coffee, cologne, and memories that now meant nothing. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and began the process he never thought I had the strength or clarity to carry out. Years of managing our bills and finances had given me an intimate map of every account, every password, every recurring charge. Leo had taken for granted that I'd always be there to keep things running, that he could replace me emotionally but not practically. That assumption was about to cost him dearly. I logged into the bank first. Half the savings were legally mine, and I transferred every dollar into a new account under my name. No theatrics, no hesitation, just numbers shifting silently on a screen. Next, I moved through the utilities, electricity, internet, phone. Every service registered to me was terminated with a few clicks. The apartment that had once been our shared space would turn into a cold, unlit box by the time he returned. I even called the water company, letting them know the leaseholder was vacating the unit. The satisfaction wasn't in revenge, it was in taking back control. Every click felt like reclaiming a piece of myself he had chipped away through years of subtle manipulation. He had built his confidence on my dependability, on the quiet stability I provided behind his ambition. By morning, he would wake to find that every safety net he leaned on had vanished. I didn't stop there. I removed him from my health insurance, updated my payroll details, and rerouted my paychecks to the new account. His name disappeared from every document where it once sat beside mine. I printed the confirmations, folded them neatly, and placed them in a drawer, a record of my liberation. Then I packed a suitcase with essentials. Clothes, documents, the small framed photo of my parents that had always reminded me where I came from. By the time the clock struck midnight, my world was stripped down to only what was mine. I looked around the apartment one last time. The walls that had heard our laughter now standing silent, neutral witnesses to the unraveling. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter, a small circle of metal that had once symbolized forever. When Leo returned from his celebration, he would find darkness, silence, and a stack of final notices waiting for him. Every tie he thought bound me to him was gone. I hadn't just left, I had erased my presence so completely that all he'd have left was the echo of everything he took for granted. The apartment was still dark when I began to pack. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound left in a space that no longer felt like home. I moved through the rooms deliberately, collecting what truly mattered: documents, a few clothes, the small jewelry box my mother had given me, and a photo of myself before marriage, when my eyes still looked certain. I wasn't rushing. I was dismantling a life that had already ended. When I opened the drawer of Leo's desk, the scent of expensive cologne drifted out, sharp and foreign. He had always been meticulous about his papers, but this time carelessness had betrayed him. Inside were folded receipts from hotels I had never visited, restaurants we had never dined in, and gifts I had never received. A diamond bracelet, a silk scarf, a dinner for two at a rooftop bar with a view of the city skyline. Each piece of evidence spoke louder than any confession. I spread them across the desk, a collage of deceit. Tucked between the receipts was an envelope written in neat, looping handwriting. To my Leo, here's to everything we've built in secret. My fingers tightened around the edge of the card. Inside, the message was short but cutting. Tomorrow is ours. I'm proud of you. Always, Sloane. The words were intimate, confident, and cruelly casual, as if I were a forgotten character in the story of their love. I pulled out my phone and began to photograph everything. The receipts, the card, the credit statements showing charges from weekends he'd claimed to be on business. Each click of the camera felt like reclaiming power. He had counted on me walking away broken, but I was walking away armed. Every image was a piece of protection, a record of the truth he had buried under charm and ambition. As I moved through the apartment, I noticed how many things had already lost meaning. The couch where we used to plan our future looked foreign. The framed photos on the wall felt like props from someone else's life. I opened the balcony door, letting in the chill of early morning. The horizon was beginning to blush with light. It was almost dawn, time to go. I loaded the suitcase into my car, the weight of it grounding me in a strange calm. Before locking the door, I placed a single note on the kitchen counter beside my wedding ring. The handwriting was steady. You wanted to know what dead weight does? It stops carrying you. I didn't look back as I walked down the stairs. The air outside was cold and clear, the street empty except for a few parked cars glistening under the first light of morning. I slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and drove off without a single tear. Every mile between me and that apartment felt like an unspoken vow, to never again shrink myself for someone else's comfort. By the time the city faded in the rearview mirror, the sun had risen. I wasn't sure where I was going yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was finally free, and Leo would wake to find a silence louder than any revenge I could have planned. The city smelled different, salt and rain and the faint tang of pine. Nothing like the stifling air of the apartment I had left behind. Seattle's streets were crowded with umbrellas, each person moving with purpose, oblivious to the dramas of my past. I navigated the sidewalks with a single suitcase, scanning the small ads until I found a studio apartment that was modest but mine. The walls were bare, the floors cold, but the key in my hand felt like a declaration. This space would belong entirely to me. No compromises, no expectations, no history. Inside, I unpacked slowly, placing essentials in the small kitchen, arranging clothes in a tiny closet, and setting a few cherished books on the windowsill. The space was sparse, but it was freedom in its purest form. There were no traces of Leo, no reminders of betrayal, just clean surfaces and empty corners waiting for the life I intended to build. I breathed in the faint scent of fresh paint and new beginnings, letting the city's rhythm seep into me. The next day, I started my new job. Catherine, my manager, was brisk and focused, expecting results without fuss or sentimentality. She didn't care about my past, my heartbreak, or the man who had tried to erase me. All she noticed was my attention to detail, my reliability, my willingness to tackle any challenge. For the first time in months, my work felt untainted, a reflection of my own skill rather than a support to someone else's ambition. I settled into a routine: early mornings, coffee from the corner cafe, walks along the waterfront, and quiet evenings reading by the window. There was a satisfaction in paying my own bills, balancing accounts, and watching a life take shape under my own decisions. Each day was unremarkable to anyone else, but for me, it was revolutionary. The quiet, predictable rhythm allowed me to reclaim small pieces of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. Confidence in my choices, pride in my independence, and a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with a partner. Evenings were my favorite. The city lights reflected on the wet streets, and I would sit on the narrow balcony with a mug of tea, listening to the distant hum of traffic and rain tapping softly on the roof. The solitude wasn't lonely, it was restorative. I began sketching, writing notes, imagining possibilities, and letting my mind wander freely for the first time in years. Step by step, I rebuilt not just a routine, but a foundation for the woman I wanted to be. I didn't need recognition or approval. I needed consistency, control, and quiet strength. With every small act, turning the key in the door, completing a task at work, walking without looking back, I carved a space for myself that Leo could never touch. Seattle wasn't just a city. It was the ground upon which I would rise again, one measured, intentional day at a time. Weeks into my new routine, I noticed subtle signs that my past hadn't fully released its grip. A few unusual charges appeared on my account notifications, minor at first: a coffee shop in a neighborhood I rarely visited, a boutique purchase I hadn't made, but enough to make my skin crawl. It didn't take long to connect the dots. Someone was watching, tracking my movements. The familiarity of the accounts and methods hinted at one person and one person only: Leo. The panic that had once been his private luxury now spilled into my life. He had always depended on access, on knowing where I was, on controlling the flow of resources. Now, using privileges I had never imagined he could abuse, he had traced my debit card, following the rhythm of my independence. Each alert was a reminder that he believed he could reclaim a presence I had long since removed. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, a man appeared at the office, lean, polished, carrying the aura of someone used to authority. He asked for me by name and claimed hurriedly that he needed to clarify a mistake, glancing nervously at my co-workers as if their presence would dissolve the boundaries he had no right to cross. He smiled in a practiced way, the kind that masks desperation, but the tremor in his voice betrayed the obsession that had taken root. I didn't react immediately. My colleagues, sensing the tension, quietly formed a protective perimeter. Catherine, always vigilant, watched him with suspicion sharpened by experience. The man tried to charm, to manipulate, to insinuate familiarity, but he had misjudged the distance I had cultivated and the watchful eyes around me. Within moments, security arrived, guided by the silent but unmistakable signals from my team, and he was escorted from the building, muttering claims of misunderstanding and error. The incident left a chill in the office, but also a strange sense of affirmation. The walls I had constructed around my new life, professional boundaries, personal space, and prudent vigilance, were proving effective. Leo had underestimated the resilience that came from reclaiming control, from severing reliance and rebuilding autonomy. Evenings became moments to recalibrate, to reinforce routines and remind myself that the city, my work, and my independence were shields as much as foundations. Each act of intrusion only strengthened my resolve. He had attempted to infiltrate the life I was deliberately shaping, but every step he took toward me only reaffirmed the distance I had established. By the time the week ended, I had reinforced all security measures, updated passwords, and monitored unusual activity with precision. Leo's attempts to reclaim what he lost were transparent, desperate, and ultimately futile. I realized that freedom was not merely leaving. It was defending the space you created, and I was prepared to do so without hesitation. The pile of evidence I had gathered over the past weeks sat neatly organized on my desk. Screenshots of transactions, hotel and restaurant receipts, and logs showing repeated attempts to monitor my spending. Every entry, every timestamp, told a story of intrusion and obsession, and it was enough to make even the most detached observer recognize the severity of his actions. I realized I couldn't rely on fear or avoidance alone. This required formal action. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in harassment and professional misconduct. She listened carefully as I laid out the pattern of his behavior, the tracking of accounts, and the moment he had appeared at my workplace. Her questions were precise, focused on the gaps in documentation and the timing of the violations. I provided everything: the photographs, the emails, the transaction alerts, even the notes I had made when I first noticed unusual activity. The clarity of the record shocked her, even as it confirmed that Leo had overstepped legal boundaries repeatedly. The next step was filing a restraining order. Sitting in the sterile office, I watched the lawyer draft the document, each word carefully chosen to ensure that it encompassed not just proximity limits, but also digital contact and indirect harassment. Leo was not just a former husband. He had become a threat to my autonomy. By the time the filing was submitted, the order legally barred him from approaching, calling, or attempting to monitor me in any form. But the legal measures didn't stop at personal protection. With clear evidence of misuse of banking privileges and repeated stalking, we filed a formal complaint with the State Banking Commission. Leo had built his identity on reputation, professionalism, and a meticulous career trajectory. Now, his actions were not just personal violations. They were professional misconduct, breaches of trust that could unravel his standing entirely. The complaint outlined misuse of financial authority, invasion of privacy, and ethical breaches, creating a paper trail that could not be ignored. As the lawyer explained the potential outcomes, I felt a strange mixture of relief and vindication. For months, he had relied on arrogance, on assuming his position and charm would shield him. But the rules existed for moments like this, and the law would act where courage alone might not suffice. Each form signed, each document submitted, reinforced the sense that his obsession would no longer dominate my life. Returning home that evening, I felt the first genuine calm in months. The walls around my life were no longer abstract. They were supported by authority and precedent. Leo's carefully constructed empire of control and self-importance faced exposure, and I finally understood the magnitude of reclaiming my power. Not through confrontation, but through systems designed to protect the innocent and hold the reckless accountable. The man who had thought he could erase me was now the one under scrutiny, facing consequences he had neither foreseen nor deserved leniency from. The rain had just begun when I entered the small coffee shop tucked between two bookstores, the same one I had come to every Sunday since moving to Seattle. The barista greeted me by name, and the warmth of the place wrapped around me like a ritual. I ordered my usual drink, sat by the window, and opened my notebook, ready to sink into the quiet rhythm of the morning. I didn't notice him at first. The reflection in the glass caught his outline before I heard his voice. Eliza. It was barely above a whisper, but my body froze before my mind could catch up. I turned slowly, and there he was, Leo, standing just inside the doorway, drenched from the rain, eyes hollow and desperate. The sight of him stirred no anger, no sadness. Just a detached awareness that this man had once been the center of my world. He stepped closer, ignoring the cautious glances from the other customers. His voice cracked when he spoke again. I know I wasn't fair. I made mistakes, but you can't just erase what we had. I still love you. The words hung in the air, heavy with the same manipulation he had always used to twist guilt into compliance. But there was no trace of power left in him now, only exhaustion. I closed my notebook and looked at him calmly. You shouldn't be here, Leo. You know what the restraining order means. My tone was steady, almost gentle, but it carried a finality that even he couldn't mistake. He reached for my hand, but I moved it away before he touched me. Please, he said, his voice breaking. I don't have anyone left. They suspended me at the bank. Everyone's turned their back on me. I just wanted to talk, to make things right. I studied him for a long moment. The tailored confidence was gone. The man in front of me was stripped bare. His arrogance dissolved into something small and pleading. For the first time, I saw the truth he had tried to hide beneath all his control. He wasn't powerful. He was terrified of being ordinary. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, almost soft. You didn't want a partner, Leo. You wanted an employee. And I resigned. The words landed with quiet precision. His face fell, his mouth opening as if to argue, but I continued before he could speak. You keep saying you love me, but you never loved me. You loved the reflection of yourself you saw through me. You loved being admired, not known. He stared at me, unable to answer, his hands trembling slightly. Then, as if trying to reclaim some piece of control, he asked, Is there someone else? I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said simply. His name is David. He listens, he respects, and he doesn't need to diminish me to feel strong. The silence stretched. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Then the sound of a door opening broke the stillness. Security had arrived, alerted quietly by the barista. They escorted him out without resistance, his gaze lingering on me one last time. When the door closed behind him, I turned back to my coffee. The rain outside had softened to a drizzle, the reflection in the glass now showing only me, steady, whole, and unafraid. The news spread quickly through the bank, whispers ricocheting through the hallways like a contagion. Leo, once admired for his ambition and polished demeanor, was suddenly a cautionary tale. Internal audits revealed repeated misuse of his position, unauthorized access to private accounts, and persistent harassment. The board acted swiftly. Termination papers were delivered by hand, and his office cleared in the span of an hour. There was no fanfare, no dignity, just the echo of footsteps and the finality of a career erased. The revocation of his banking license followed soon after, the state commission citing violations so severe that reinstatement was impossible. Colleagues who had once smiled and congratulated him now avoided his gaze, some offering barely concealed satisfaction at the downfall of the man who had believed himself untouchable. Even the networks he had cultivated, the contacts he had counted on, began quietly severing ties, unwilling to risk association with someone exposed so completely. Sloan, who had once reveled in proximity to his status, vanished from his life almost immediately. The excitement of their affair evaporated in the face of public disgrace. She left town, leaving behind the apartment they had rented together and the dreams they had built atop his assumed invincibility. Without her reinforcement, Leo's isolation intensified. Returning home to his hometown, he confronted a life that had not waited for him to crumble. Friends were distant, opportunities non-existent, and the town itself seemed indifferent to his presence. The jobs available to him were far removed from the corporate prestige he had known: retail, administrative temp work, menial tasks that paid little and offered no influence. He became a shadow of the man who once commanded attention in boardrooms and celebrated milestones. Even personal relationships deteriorated. Family members who had been patient or supportive grew weary of his defensiveness and excuses. He had lost the new woman who once indulged his ambitions, the wife who had invested years of trust, and the professional identity he had relied upon to define himself. The accumulation of choices he had made, arrogance, deceit, and obsession, coalesced into a reality he could neither control nor escape. Meanwhile, the broader consequences rippled outward. Clients doubted the integrity of the bank, supervisors questioned internal processes, and the story circulated in financial circles as a warning about the dangers of entitlement and ethical compromise. Leo's collapse became a study in pride undermined by poor judgment, and in every corner of his old world, reminders of accountability lingered. By the time months passed, he was entirely unrecognizable in the life he had returned to. The prestige, the power, the relationships, all vanished. Where once he had moved with confidence and expectation, now he navigated streets, offices, and conversations with caution, humility imposed not by choice but by circumstance. The man who had attempted to control everything around him found himself alone, diminished, and confronted daily with the consequences of a life built on manipulation and self-interest. The morning sun filtered softly through the sheer curtains of the apartment I now called home, illuminating the warm tones of the wooden floors and carefully chosen furnishings. Everything in the space reflected intention, a blend of comfort, function, and subtle elegance. No piece was extravagant for display, yet each spoke to years of decisions made deliberately, free from compromise or coercion. I poured a cup of tea and moved to the balcony, breathing in the crisp air and the faint scent of the garden below. The life I had built with David was steady, balanced, and nourishing in ways I had never imagined. He treated me as an equal, valuing my opinions, supporting my ambitions, and never attempting to dominate or dictate. Our partnership was not flashy or performative, but in its simplicity lay a richness I had long sought. Every morning we shared conversation, coffee, and laughter, a quiet intimacy that made the routines of daily life feel like a sanctuary. My career had flourished too, beyond what I had once believed possible. Rising to a directorship, I managed projects that challenged me intellectually and creatively, earning the respect of peers and mentors without compromising my values. Meetings, deadlines, and negotiations no longer felt like arenas of anxiety, but opportunities to assert skill and judgment with confidence and clarity. In this environment, success was measured not by appearances, but by competence, trust, and the knowledge that my contributions mattered. Evenings were slow, unhurried, and completely mine. I often lingered over a book or sketchpad, letting thoughts flow freely without fear of interruption or judgment. The house hummed with quiet energy, soft music, the occasional scent of baking, the warmth of shared meals prepared together. There was a richness to this life that wealth alone could never buy: stability, respect, and the freedom to exist fully as myself. Looking back, the betrayal that had once felt like devastation now appeared as the catalyst for transformation. Leo's decision to discard me, his arrogance and short-sightedness, had severed ties that were never meant to be binding. In leaving him, I had not merely escaped humiliation or manipulation. I had reclaimed agency over my own story. That freedom had allowed me to construct a life of substance, a home, and relationships rooted in authenticity rather than obligation. As I watched the soft sunlight shift across the room, I felt a calm satisfaction that was impossible to quantify. The quiet luxury I inhabited was not material, but existential, a life in which choices reflected desire and principle rather than expectation or duty. Every moment, every decision, every achievement reinforced the reality that true wealth lay in autonomy and peace. The woman I had become thrived because I had endured, because I had acted, and because I had refused to settle. What Leo had attempted to destroy had instead become the foundation for a happiness he could never imagine, and for that, I felt unshakable gratitude. Do you think I was right to walk away from Leo when I did, or should I have tried to salvage our marriage? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your perspective matters to me. Share your opinion in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about resilience and standing up for yourself, make sure to follow for more inspiring journeys.